Good afternoon. I'm Warren Hahn with Early Growth Financial Services. We provide outsourced financial services to startups, founders, and their businesses, reducing the financial burdens and administrative headaches that come with running an early stage company. And we're here today with Silicon Valley immigration attorney Sophie Alcorn. She'll be going over some of the effects of Trump on immigration and the questions that we have in the environment. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Sophie, if you'd like to talk more on your background.
Yes, thank you very much, Oren, and thank you to Early Growth Financial Services for hosting this webinar. As you and everybody out there listening knows, immigration is in the news all the time right now, and the environment, the political environment in the United States is growing increasingly hostile towards immigration, but there are still many good reasons that people who are born in other countries need and want to come to the United States, and many good and wonderful people with amazing ideas and startups who would really help the United States economy if they could be here and get legal immigration services. So I'd like to thank everybody on the webinar today, and for those of you listening to this later on YouTube, thank you for making the time and taking the time to learn about this issue. We're going to be talking about lots of major changes that are going on in immigration law right now, but we'll be primarily focusing on how these changes are affecting Silicon Valley. And I don't mean the specific geographic area of the San Francisco Peninsula stretching from San Francisco to San Jose. I mean Silicon Valley as a concept. You know, there are very many tech hubs all across the United States in places like Austin, Texas, and New York City. So this is really about how the recent political changes have been affecting immigration law in tech in the United States. And the reason I'm here is because I believe that immigration causes innovation. America for centuries has been a melting pot built on the ideas of people who have come from all around the world to make it great. And I truly believe, and I've seen and experienced in my work, how people from who are born in different countries and different cultures and speak different languages, all of those things cause people to think differently. And when a bunch of people are together, you know, if you compare two groups of people, one where everybody thinks the same and the other where people think differently, the group that has people who all think in different ways will come up with better ideas and more innovation. And so that's why I'm inspired to practice immigration law. And for me, my career journey to become an immigration lawyer started with my family. These are my parents at their wedding. My dad was an immigration lawyer in California for 35 years. And my mom is an immigrant from Germany. So I know what it's like to grow up and bridge two cultures, have family on different continents, grow up speaking two different languages. And so I understand, I understand what it's like to feel like an immigrant, and that can often feel like you're on the outside and you're rejected and you're struggling to find a way in. And I understand that, and at my firm, our team understands that, and that's why we're here. So we can help companies, startup founders, investors, inventors, software engineers, and their families all find ways to legally come to the United States, stay in the United States, live in the United States, and also work in the United States, either for an employer or for a company that you want to start yourself. So our office is in Mountain View, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley. I have been practicing immigration law now for almost 9 years, but I've been working in it and exposed to it for most of my life, for over 18 years, since I was a teenager. And just a bit about my background: I attended Stanford University. I've won some awards, but that doesn't really matter. What matters more for you guys is that we really care about our clients, and historically we've had a very high success rate with helping immigrants. This is outside the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services office in San Jose, California. This was an event with the Mountain View Chamber of Commerce, which we're involved in. We're highly involved in the startup community here. This was a startup grind with my immigration lawyer shirt. I wore this right after the recent presidential inauguration, and literally nobody wanted to talk to me. I think everybody was afraid that they would get in trouble or something if they were seen talking to me. So that's kind of funny. And immigration cases are complex. You know, this is an average size case that we do, and the government is as tech savvy as we are, and as much as we try to do everything in the cloud to make it easy for our clients, the government is still very far behind, and they do everything on 90% of everything on paper. So so there's a large volume of clerical work that goes into immigration law cases as well. And at my firm, Alcorn Immigration Law in Mountain View, we help a number of startups, also incubators, accelerators, individual founders, inventors. These are a sampling of some of our clients. So let's talk about why we're all here today. Immigration is a difficult process. That's the bad news. And it's also getting more and more complex and challenging. I mean, just in the news today, there are headlines about Nancy Pelosi. Some of the headlines say that she's calling for a DACA deal as a first step towards comprehensive immigration reform. There are conflicting headlines saying, no, we're not going to overhaul immigration right now. Let's just save the Dreamers. The Apple CEO is weighing in on the Dreamers program as the biggest issue of our time. And we'll be talking a bit about Dreamers and DACA in a little bit and how that relates to Silicon Valley. There's, you know, even more news about the border wall and ICE arrests of undocumented immigrants. Those are very important issues that are happening right now, but they are not the focus of today's talk. But if you do have questions about those, you're welcome to reach out to me at the end of this presentation, and we will be providing contact information for you at the end. But just so you have it, if you need to reach our office, our website is www.alcorn.law, L-A-W, and you can call us at 855-546-0015 or email us at help@alcorn.law. So what we are going to talk about is what are the changes that have been going on in immigration since the president took office earlier this year? How is the political climate affecting immigration? And what are really the specific regulatory changes and administrative processing changes that are affecting people? Because Congress has not actually passed any laws yet that have changed immigration. So we'll be getting to all of that in just a moment, but before we go into it, I want to lay the foundation so that you have a basic understanding of immigration law, so that you understand some keywords. And I found this is helpful to all different types of people. So whether you're listening in because you're doing HR at a company, or whether you're a founder and you're going to start to hire students on OPT, or you yourself are a founder and you're trying to find a way to stay here, or you're an investor conducting due diligence and you want to learn, you know, should you invest in this company? Can the founders actually stay here? So this is important for all of you to understand some key words, terminology, and how our immigration process is currently set up. So first of all, the way people who are not born in the United States are supposed to come here is by getting a visa. And you get a visa in a foreign country at the US consulate or embassy where you live, and it allows you to come to the United States. And once you're here, you could apply to US Citizenship and Immigration Services to either extend your status for another period of time or to change your status from one non-immigrant status to another non-immigrant status. But you're allowed to stay here as long as it's before a date that gets stamped in your passport next to your visa on the day you come here. And that's called your I-94 stamp. And you can also look up online your I-94 information to make sure that what's in the government's electronic system matches what they stamped in your passport. And if you notice a discrepancy, that's something that we can help you fix. It's important to fix that. Now, if you don't come here with a visa, that's legally called entering without inspection. You're coming into the United States, but a Customs and Border Protection officer was not able to inspect you. So that's how people get here. And so those are all temporary, you know, visas are all temporary, usually non-immigrant statuses. And when somebody wants a green card, that means they want to become a permanent resident. And that means you're allowed to live in the United States the rest of your life, work for anybody who you want to work for, and have the ability to eventually become a citizen. Now, you can get a green card either when you're here through the adjustment of status process, or you can do it outside of the United States, coming here for the first time or maybe a subsequent time. But when you do that, you're getting an immigrant visa and you're applying for it at a US consular post or maybe at an embassy. So after you've had your green card for 5 years, then if you want to, and if you meet the requirements, you can apply to become a United States citizen. And that process is called naturalization. And once you do it, you become a citizen. And some people who are not born in the United States become citizens automatically through maybe through their parents. And that's different. That's called acquisition of citizenship. So those are my key terms. And before I go any further, I want to let everybody know that if you have any questions, I'm happy to respond to them. You can save them for the end if you want, but there's no need to. And you're welcome to ask them at any time during the presentation. And especially if I'm, on one topic, feel free to ask about it before I move on. And that way we can make sure to get your questions answered.
And so, just to follow up on your question, for anyone who's dialing in, if you're using our web access, you can type in a question in the top right in the control panel of the GoToWebinar to send it in through the web panel, just to let our listeners know.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oren. Okay.
You're welcome.
Now we're going to continue on with the material, and we're going to talk about DACA. So DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and this is the program for Dreamers. And this program started in 2012, and Dreamers are undocumented immigrants who came to the United States as children. So they either, as we talked about in the previous slide, they either entered without inspection or came on visas, but then overstayed the visas and went out of status. And so DACA has been in effect for several years now, since President Obama was in office, and it allowed people to have a work permit to remain in the United States, and it also allowed people to sometimes get advance parole to be able to travel outside of the United States for compelling reasons, and then be allowed back in. And it never promised anybody that they wouldn't be deported, but the government had shifted the priorities around and said formally that they weren't going to go after people who were in this program. So it decreased the likelihood of deportation. So a couple weeks ago, there was an announcement by Trump and the administration that they are changing and closing out the DACA program and no longer accepting new requests for DACA. And they're no longer allowing people to request travel documents, advanced parole, associated with DACA. And if anybody needs to renew DACA, if your current DACA work permit expires between now and March 5th, you have to file your final extension request by October 5th. Today is September 21st, 2017. So that gives you 2 more weeks from today in order to file your DACA renewal. And if that's something you need, you're welcome to contact our office. We've assisted many clients with that. So this raises some interesting questions in the tech space because, dreamers tend to be, educated, hardworking individuals, and there are many employed in the tech industry and in big corporations and small startups, software engineers and other positions doing very important jobs to Silicon Valley. And so what does this mean for people running the company about whether you can continue to employ DACA employees? So the answer is anybody with DACA is allowed to keep working until their current work permit expires, and you don't need to, go track them down or give them any special treatment. They are currently eligible to work still. And it's important, though, for employers to do an I-9 internal audit to make sure that you're complying with all of the immigration requirements about how to document that all the people who work at your company are legal and have permission to work there. And it's also good, it's just a good practice to have a tickler system so that you know in advance when documents are expiring, and at that point you could give your employee a heads up. So those are all important things to keep in mind, and we do also help companies audit their I-9s. So that's an additional thing that we could help you with, or if you're just hiring and getting started, we can help educate you about how to take care of that and do it all properly. Additionally, if you are on DACA, the big question is, how can you stay in the United States? We don't know what Congress is going to do. We don't know if they're going to pass a DACA law, pass an immigration reform law, what's going to happen. So there are other ways to stay, and we've been consulting with many individuals. The details of each person's story are very different, and they affect legally what your options are for staying here. So we have many new clients who had been happy on DACA, but now obviously they're panicking, and there are some creative things we can do to help them. Some of the strategies, if you're on DACA and you really want to find a way to stay, would involve, investigating the past from the 90s or very early 2000s to see if anybody in your family was ever sponsored for a green card. That could give you something called 245I protection. If you've married a United States citizen, you might be eligible for a green card if you have a good faith marriage and you intend to share a life together. And then it depends on, do you need a hardship waiver for coming here without inspection, or maybe you got advanced parole under DACA and you traveled and you could get a green card in the United States that way. There are also immigration options for people who have been victims of crimes or domestic violence or who need asylum. So this is definitely something that we're consulting with a lot of people with right now to try to find ways to help them stay. And okay, so that's DACA. Do we have any questions about DACA right now before we move on? No, I'm not seeing any. Okay.
Are there any liabilities for, one of the questions we have is are there any liabilities that founders or investors need to worry about as far as with their company standing by having any DACA participants? I know you touched on that a little bit earlier, but just from the...
Thank you. So the most important thing is that all employees have work authorization that's currently valid, and if their work permit or other visa that allows them to work here ends, then they can't work for you anymore. So, investors might be cautious from a due diligence perspective if some of your key talent has an immigration status that's going to be expiring. Is that a good investment? And founders obviously want to find a way to stay here and build their companies as long as they possibly can. So it is very important, but startups don't face any different liabilities than other companies would. There can be audits to make sure you're complying with all of these things. There are fines and penalties if you don't comply. So, more changes. There are more visas being denied, and this is, I don't have official data on this. This is anecdotal, but the climate is definitely changing. And I think one effect of the recent, of the new administration and is this trickle-down effect from the attitude of the president. And I'm hearing more and more stories from my clients about how officers, Customs and Border Patrol officers at the airport and in secondary inspections are getting tougher and more arbitrary, and how officers at the border, at consulates in other countries are also doing random denials. I met with a young woman a few weeks ago who had been enrolled in a bachelor's degree program here in the United States, and she had to go home to visit her family and to see her mom. And she had traveled in the past and never had any problems and never done anything wrong, but her visa was expiring, so she needed to go get a new one before she came back. And at that interview, the officer said, you know what, I know you're midway through your bachelor's degree, and her parents had paid full tuition for her to attend the private university in the United States. And the officer said to her, but I don't think you need to go finish your bachelor's degree in the U.S. I think you should just stay here, and you can just transfer to another school back home. You don't need this visa anymore. And so she had to drop out of school. And, we're working on another way for her to come back and stay here. But the atmosphere is getting tough. And I think that the rhetoric is causing fear and also all of these bureaucrat and government officers' attitudes to change about how they're enforcing the existing laws and regulations. And so even if there's no legislative change, the political agenda of chilling immigration is succeeding just based on the rhetoric. There's another really important change that happened as well, which is now, and this is actually something that's written down. There was a State Department cable, so Washington, D.C. State Department notifying all the consulates and embassies around the world that if somebody gets a visa and like a tourist visa or student visa or whatever, and comes here, and then within the first 90 days of them being in the United States, they apply to change their status to another non-immigrant status, or they apply for a green card, that consulate in the future can accuse them of committing fraud, and they can be barred for many years or even life, effectively for life, from ever being able to come back in. So that's a really important thing. If you're here and it's been less than 90 days, don't do anything to, well, you can do whatever you want, but if you change your status before 90 days, then you could face big problems in the future, and that's a very recent development as well. Okay.
So what would you recommend is the way to change a status? Is it just a matter of waiting 90 days or working with a lawyer?
90 days or longer, and you've got to be very strategic about it. And if it ever comes up, you need to be able to explain and document how and why your needs changed and why you didn't just originally apply for the visa that you ended up with when you were back home in your country. Because even if you waited longer than 90 days, they could still potentially accuse you of committing fraud. So the atmosphere is getting very, very fraught, and it's more challenging. But we can still help you, and it's still possible. It's harder, but it's absolutely still possible. And I know that many founders and investors are super determined to come to the United States and make their way here. And there are still things we can do. We can have a strategy meeting to figure out the best option for you. We can make sure you're completely eligible. We can make sure that your need for whatever you want is well documented. We do practice interviews so that you know how to honestly and truthfully answer questions at the interviews, and not so that you're confident that you have a high chance of success. So there are things.
If I can interject, one of the questions I know that we've talked about before is about expedited requests. We've talked about some of the hurdles. Mm-hmm. What are some of the ways that you can actually help with the current climate?
Yeah, we do expedite requests too, and that is coming up in a few slides. So I'm going to touch on that in a minute, Oren. Okay?
Don't jump ahead. Sorry.
Thanks. That's okay. So, that's the very next slide. That was the perfect segue. All right. So let's talk about expedite criteria. If you have a case that's going on in the United States with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and you need an answer fast because there's an emergency, there is a way for you to request faster processing of the case. And this is different from the premium processing program. This is typically used for cases that are not eligible for premium processing. So that could be work permit applications, changes of status, green card applications. There are many possibilities. But if you are in a situation where your company is facing severe financial loss, or you as an individual are, because you're not able to get the status that you need on time, if there's an emergency, if there are humanitarian reasons that warrant it, you could get an expedite request. It's also available if there's if you're affiliated with maybe a nonprofit or the Department of Defense, or if there's a USCIS mistake in your case. So if you have an emergency situation where you need to get your documents sooner, we can help you file an expedite request, and that's for cases already pending with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Okay, so another change is now green cards are going to be required to involve interviews for everybody who's applying for adjustment of status in the United States. So people can get green cards through family, through the green card lottery, or through employment. And historically, over the past 10 or 15 years or so, USCIS has waived the employment interviews in the green card adjustment of status process, because they figure, you know, probably everything's fine, we'll do the background check. Normally the people getting employment-based green cards have been on F as a student, or H-1B as a skilled worker, and they haven't gone out of status. So it just hasn't been worth the administrative burden for the government to interview everybody. But starting October 1st, USCIS is now going to require all applicants for employment-based green cards to attend a personal interview before the green card can be processed to completion. They say it's going to be phased in, but they don't say how it's going to do so. They're already at capacity for interviews in all the local USCIS field offices that do marriage green card interviews and citizenship green card interviews. So I really don't know how they're going to handle the burden of hiring the officers and getting the space to take on this additional load. But this is as a result of the President's March 6th executive order trying to protect the United States from terrorist activities, including increasing screening and vetting standards for the immigration programs. So basically, you know, if you are at a company and you have an approved I-140 and your I-485 is pending, don't count anymore on just getting the approval notice in the mail. You're going to have to go to an interview. And the interviews, you know, are typically 20 minutes, but they can go up to an hour if there's a problem or an issue and the immigration officer starts to really want to dig into your background and see all of your documents and connect the dots with all the details. So for our clients, we offer a couple services. One of them is having a practice interview, a mock interview, to make sure that all of your documents are in order, you have all the originals that you need, that you might be asked for, and that you have a deep and thorough understanding of what they might ask you, what you've already told them the answers are on paper, making sure those answers are still correct in real life right now, you know, handling any discrepancies honestly, ethically, truthfully. And then we also have a service of, we actually send attorneys with our clients to all of their green card interviews, because we find that it's much faster, smoother to have an attorney there. Even, you know, you don't have to have like a criminal record or anything to need an attorney at an interview. It's just, even if you don't want the hassle or you're scared or nervous, it can be hugely reassuring. And plus, it usually makes the interviews go much faster, because if the officer has any legal questions, it's easy for the attorney to answer them and provide all of the information that is needed. So another thing I would like to talk about is H-1Bs. And you've probably heard a lot about H-1Bs in the news. H-1Bs are non-immigrant visas for workers in a specialty occupation that's professional and requires a bachelor's degree in a related field in order for the person to do the job. Any company can sponsor a qualifying person for an H-1B. If you don't have a bachelor's degree, you can show that you meet the criteria in alternative ways by showing your work experience in the field. And the employer has to show that they're a real company and they're doing business and they've got money, and then they really have the work and the need for this full-time or part-time employee. And if it's approved, the person's allowed to stay for 3 years with an extension for another 3 years, so for a total of 6 years. And then if somebody starts the green card process for the foreign person, they could be allowed to stay while they're waiting for the green card to actually come. So for some countries like India and China, where there are long backlogs for green cards, that allows people to work in H-1B status longer. And every year there are 85,000 new H-1B visas available. And usually over the past several years, there have been over 200,000 applications. So that means that there's a lottery system that has developed. So every April 1st, the lottery opens for the first 5 business days of the month. Everybody sends in all of their H-1Bs. The government does a lottery. And then on October 1st, that's the start date for all of the H-1B visas. And H-1Bs have been in the news a lot. People have very strong feelings about them. Probably, if there is comprehensive immigration reform, the H-1B laws will change. There might be changes to the requirements to increase the amount that the employer must certify that there are no qualified Americans who can do the job. But none of that has actually happened yet. The entire H-1B program legally has remained the same, and so far we're still on track for another round of the lottery to happen in April of 2018, and we're starting to get cases where companies know that they want to hire somebody and sponsor them for an H-1B. Maybe they're a current employee who's been a student, so they have the OPT work permit program and they're a current employee and they want to try every chance that they can to get selected in the lottery. So even though there's been a lot of rhetoric about the H-1B, the bottom line is the program is essentially the same. There has been one change, and that is that just before this year, 2017 lottery, the USCIS announced that premium processing would be canceled for H-1Bs. And this is a little bit different from the expedite request that we talked about earlier in the webinar. Premium processing is where you pay an extra $1,225 to USCIS, and they guarantee that they will take action on the application within 15 days or return the money. And what they often do is take 15 days, issue a request for evidence, you have to respond, and then they have another 15 days to make their decision after you respond. So it's been canceled though since April of 2017, and that has made it very, very difficult for people who are already on H-1B to transfer to a new employer, because the processing time is about 7 hours. there as soon as the new employer files the new H-1B petition with USCIS, but you might not find out if it's approved or not, until 7 months later. And if it ends up being denied, well, then you have a big problem. So historically, people have wanted to use premium processing, wait to see if it's approved, then give notice at their current company, and then transfer to the new employer to make sure they don't go out of status. So that's been a big challenge, and it has definitely chilled the flow of labor between companies in Silicon Valley because people are afraid to leave their current jobs. But just this week, USCIS announced that they are phasing back in premium processing for the current H-1B lottery. So this is not for transfers, but this would be if your employer filed a petition for you last April and it was going to have an October 1st, 2017 start date. If you haven't gotten an answer yet, you can upgrade, and we can file to add premium processing to your case so that you can try to get a decision sooner. So next, another change is there are going to be more audits, and ICE and FDNS and different federal agencies who are law enforcement agencies visiting companies and employers to make sure that everything is in order. This could be I-9 audits, this could be H-1B audits, this could be raids looking for undocumented employees. So it's very important that all companies, especially new companies that are getting set up, it's critical that you do things right from the get-go and you're complying with all of these immigration rules. If you're hiring any employees, and especially if you're hiring people from other countries and sponsoring them for visas and green cards, these are always surprise visits, and they might be random or they might not be, but there's really no way to know when the officers are coming. And it's unannounced because they're trying to root out fraud and abuses of the visa program, and they can demand many different documents, and you need to be ready to comply. So it's really important to keep all of your I-9s, all of your wage information, payroll records for each position, benefits that you've given to the employees, public access folders for H-1Bs, I-9s. It's really important to keep everything in order, and if you're having trouble with that, that's something we can help you straighten out so you don't have to worry about this.
Let me ask you, Sophie, is it complicated for anyone here who's on an H-1B who wants to maybe split off and start their own company and establish immigration?
Yeah, thanks. That's
especially
a good question.
Since so many of our H-1B workers that we've come across are often in high positions. We have advanced engineering students who often want to spin off their own product. So I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, we've helped several startup founders get H-1Bs to work at their own companies. And the critical thing is we have to set the company up to comply with the law, which says that you are going to be an employee. So the company needs to be able to hire you, control your employment, and fire you. And we've succeeded, even for very early stage startups that are pre-revenue. So that's good to keep in mind. And then one thing to consider, though, is down the road in the green card application process, if you have a significant ownership interest in the company, you might not be eligible or you might not be able to get through the perm labor certification process where you're looking for qualified Americans to do the job instead of you because of the conflict of interest if you own the company. So there are other ways to self-sponsor your green card, either through an EB-1A for extraordinary ability, or an EB-1C if you're transferring from a foreign branch of the company to a U.S. office, or through an EB-2 with a national interest waiver. Those are by showing that it's in the United States national interest to have you doing this work in your company here. So those are all ways that you can transition from your startup founder H-1B to self-petitioning for a green card. So another thing—
On that note, I know you wanted to talk about companies from the other end, about them being able to retain their talent if they want to continue extending.
Right. So, you know, it is getting harder. A lot of companies don't want to deal with the H-1B lottery, and so then it's hard because you've got these bright young software engineers who are just out of college, and often U.S. citizens don't tend to study computer science and engineering, and so in the recruiting process, you find that most of the applicants are foreign-born. Basically, they're allowed to work for 1 year on the OPT training program, and then an additional 2 years if they have a science, technology, engineering, or math degree, which is called the STEM OPT program. So that usually gives companies 3 chances to put the employees in the H-1B lottery. But what happens if they don't get selected? So there are alternatives that we can do. One program allows individuals who are going to mentor university students, typically related to entrepreneurialism or business, or startup technology, to get an H-1B while skipping the lottery, because the law has an exception carved out that says that if you have a university affiliation, you don't need to go through the lottery to get an H-1B. So that's one creative strategy that we've used for our clients. Another strategy is that founders want, either they have foreign companies already, or, I have one company who has an Azerbaijan contract engineering team, and they're actually going to open a subsidiary in Azerbaijan so that they can employ the software engineers there, and then as they need them, move them over to the parent company here in Silicon Valley based on L visas for intercompany transferees. And some tech companies have a Vancouver office, and when somebody times out on their F1 and they haven't gotten an H-1B, then they go through a Canadian immigration process, move them over to the Vancouver office. They work there for a few years, and then they can transfer them back to the United States at that point. So, there are different options, and sometimes we have to be very creative so that you can retain the talent that you've invested in. Another thing that's going on is the talk in the news about green card numbers being slashed, and basically there's a lot of pressure from the Republican Party to reduce the number of green cards that are available each year. I think it's interesting. Each year there are more than 77 million foreign-born individuals that get admitted to the United States, and of them, there's only about 1.1 million green cards. And the law that would change the proposal is called the RAISE Act, and it would cut the number of green cards each year to 500,000. And it would reduce the number of green cards that are available for family-based categories and get rid of the green card lottery, and it would potentially focus on a merit-based, point-based system for getting people employment-based green cards, but it's really unclear what that merit-based system would look like. Australia and Canada have merit-based point systems for their employment-based green cards. And I think, I've heard from older individuals that they feel discriminated against by those systems and unable to get through and show that they have enough points to qualify for the green cards. But the legislative process is so complicated and can involve so many changes that it's very difficult to predict if and when this would actually happen. But a renowned immigration law professor was talking about the RAISE Act, and he's a friend of mine, and what he said is that this RAISE Act is essentially the Asian, Latino, and African Exclusion Act of 2017, because the biggest users of the family-based immigration categories are Asian and Latinos, and the biggest beneficiaries of the green card lottery are from Africa, and that this could actually end up hurting the U.S. economy and Silicon Valley, because Wharton Business School projected that if green card numbers are slashed like this, it would actually lead to less economic growth and fewer jobs and decreasing per capita GDP. So I think that's very interesting that it's being touted as a way maybe to appease Silicon Valley but still have immigration reform, but that it could actually hurt the U.S. economy. So I thought that was very
Let me ask you on that note. I know one of the questions that we were going to talk about was we talked about family green cards and worker green cards, but I see you have your next slide about investors being able to get green cards from that end.
Yeah.
Tell us something about that.
Thank you. So that's the EB-5 green card program. And this is where an investor, the current version of this program is that an investor puts $1 million into a U.S. company, and that money is connected to 10 full-time jobs for American workers. And the process, and the investor needs to have an active role in running the company and setting its direction. And this could result in a green card for the investor in about 2 to 3 years, depending on what happens during the processing phase. There's another variation of it called the EB-5 Regional Center Program, and that has a lower investment threshold. It's only $500,000, and you can put your money into a regional center where you don't have to actively run the operation, and it creates jobs in a targeted employment area. It doesn't have to be for full-time employees. It could be jobs that are created in the local economy. So there are very many large like hotel, casino development projects that use EB-5 money. And the EB-5 program is often in the news because some unscrupulous regional center owners and operators have created Ponzi schemes and committed fraud and stolen investors' money, and they're not complying with SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission regulations about offering securities. So it's been in the news a lot. Congress has their eye on it. They want to change the law. They want to do two things. They want to reduce fraud to make it safer for investors and comply with the law, which is a very good thing. And they also want to increase the minimum investment thresholds, because the 500K and 1 million numbers come from the 90s, and there's been inflation and the economy has changed, and they want to set the investment amount higher now. So this EB-5 Regional Center program was set to sunset just recently, but in the about a week and a half ago, through one of the disaster relief bills, they added in an EB5 Regional Center Extension Program. So it's actually the current program is going to continue in its present form and current financial amounts until December 8th. And then after that, maybe they'll do another temporary extension like they've been doing for the last couple of years, or maybe Congress will finally get around to passing an actual EB5 reform measure. So, so that's still coming. So if you're an investor and you're thinking of investing in a regional center, be very cautious about where you put your money. There are some very safe, reputable regional centers you can invest in, but please make sure you're choosing one of those and not one of the other types. And if you're a startup founder, you can attract investment into your company from investors with the EB5 program. Probably it will need to be at the current $1 million amount, unless we can show that you're creating the jobs in a low employment area that needs jobs. And just be selective, because you're going to need to allow this investor to have an active role in managing the direction of your company. So that's a word of advice. Okay. So.
Okay. That has been a lot of information on a lot of areas. What are some takeaways that we should take going forward on this?
Thank you. Thank you, Oren. So the bottom line is, yes, I know it feels harder to come to the United States, but so far the changes I've talked about are pretty minor. Most of this is rhetoric. It's still totally possible for you to get a visa or a green card in the United States. Another interesting final tidbit is that we had been talking about whether there would be a startup visa, and now a group of venture capitalists is suing the Trump administration to try to get that startup visa to actually go through. So maybe it will eventually happen. But what I would like to leave you with is there are ways to do this. We can absolutely help you find honest, ethical ways to stay here that you can feel confident about with your odds of succeeding. And we do offer a discounted consultation rate to anybody who's been listening to this webinar or watching it online. You can contact us at help@alcorn.law or call us at 855-546-0015 and schedule a consultation or an assessment to figure out what you're eligible for and how we can help you. So with that, I would like to thank you, Oren, and Early Growth Financial Services for hosting this webinar.
And thank you, Sophie, for all your information. And then similarly to all of our listeners, if you have any financial questions in partnership with this or in any financial concerns, feel free to reach out to us at Early Growth Financial Services. We're always offering our advice and insight, and glad to hear from you. So thanks again, Sophie. This has been an informative talk.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.